green button. It's starting. It's starting. Good. You guys. Okay. Good. Okay then. Let's start. I have more slides than Christopher had last week, and he did get through all of his. So let's see how this goes. So what we'll do today, talk about games in education. Although, since that is a topic for you to choose, I'm going to talk more about education, some of the theories, education, that I think is relevant to games in education. And as Christopher pointed out earlier, most serious games are about learning anyway. So even though we said this is for educational games, some of these theories are for an educational setting, they may still apply, even if you consider or choose something else. So I'm going to talk about some more theories. Christopher covered a few last week, and I'm going to talk about more of them. Then we're going to talk more about the balancing act. And finally, I'll talk about how to evaluate games for education. As I said, keep in mind that some of much of these can be transferable to other uses of serious games. If you have questions, you just stop me and ask question. I have a tendency to start talking too fast, so I need some flow control. First, games for education. So let's do a Kahoot game. So Christopher and I, we collaborated on a Kahoot game. So if you get ready to play.
You guys are comfortable with Kahoot? Who didn't play Kahoot yet? You didn't? Okay. Kai? Okay. Fiona? Okay. So how does it work?
So do you want to pick your own nicknames, or should I guarantee that Double has?
That's right. So first of all, I think we need to get them into Kahoot, right? So everyone needs to go to Kahoot.
Yep. Kahoot it. But let me just let you choose it.
Yeah, that thing, and then. So you need to go to kahoot.it and then enter the following pin. And everyone on the stream can follow us as well.
There's music. Where's
the music? I hear it.
How do you get up the audio? See? Okay. Oh, shit.
We care about entertainment.
Here we go. 8 players.
Yeah. Anyone have trouble getting in? Kahoot.it?
Now we're getting there. So you're still not in? Okay, let's go for it. So first question coming up.
Maybe quick to answer.
Oh, it's it's further on.
So, okay, first of all, we should have told you what the game's about. I think that's it was pretty much about last week. What's more interesting, though, my lectures don't seem to matter at all. So it's practically random. Therefore,
distribution.
well, next week onwards, you teach us something because that probably is more successful. But so, okay.
Yeah, we should have said. So this is based. This is a kind of in teaching. You're sometimes suggested that you will start by asking questions from last lecture, see if they are still there, and start from there, and probably then reviewing how much you get from it. Okay, let's see who's. you like to comment on that?
Yes, it could have recapped what the. Anyway, let's go for it. You're right. That's we waste half the hour on this.
That's the thing, yeah, right.
But it's very exciting, So.
Let's go for the next one.
So, number one.
Yeah. Nice spread between two. And although there were some evil experiments, that's not really what it's all about.
No, it's not. Okay.
No, it's not. Up.
Good number one.
Student lead.
Okay.
Yeah, so the important stuff went through.
That's exactly. But I think it's quite sensible. If you have a 0.5 probability of getting it right, then it's answer. Probably need to have more of those questions.
Okay.
Wait.
Nice scores. Sounds like Norwegian cuisine, doesn't it?
That's right.
Mat. It does. Okay. Let's see. Up and you.
Are you screwing up and running?
Sorry.
From some of your campus students. Very good. Yes, let me be attending to this. I'll be on Discord, so attend to now. I don't think anything is blinking yet. Okay. No, I just have to comment by student. The stream is it up? No, exactly.
It was. Marius was testing before. Okay. Let's do the final and then as Christopher is.
It looks good. Right. The name is wrong. Okay, just continue.
Balancing refers to. Let's do the final one. Well, let's see who the winner is. Okay. So let's leave that game.
We have 3 people who passed the oral exam on the
Right.
That's how we do. We cap it at top 3, right?
That's right. They don't need to do the exam. We already know their aces. Yeah. Okay. We'll discuss the game experience a little later. We'll start by saying a little more just the boring stuff, the theory, to get the pulse down and the adrenaline level down. So theories. I think I kind of mentioned this already last week, but to me, a theory is not something that is kind of written in stone, something that is always correct. So I've just looked up a couple of interesting ways of looking at what we mean by theory. So Oxford English Dictionary says it's a set of principles on which the practice of an activity is based. So these are principles that we base our practice on, good principles. I like this one very much. So you could say that the theories are heuristic devices to stimulate thinking. So these will help us to think in a structured, systematic way. So when we're talking about the theories here, it's not that one of them is more correct or better than the other ones. It's just ways of looking at the problem, ways of help us to think and understand an issue. So some of these theories, we talked about set determination theory and flow theory, or Christopher talked about it last week, and I find them very, very useful and relevant in games for education as well, and in education in general. Have you heard about the zone of proximal development? Sigovsky? No. So I'm going to cover it. Achievement goal theory, probably not either. These are some general learning theories. Now we have some taxonomies related to how education can be planned and what to expect, what levels, knowledge, and competence is at. And finally, talk a little bit about Kolb's learning cycle, which is a model or a theory for how you learn based on reflecting on experiences. And games would fit very much, could fit very much into that way of thinking or learning. Yes?
If you're not playing sound, can you turn off the speakers?
We can turn them off, definitely. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry, the ones on music. Let's continue.
That sounds okay, or?
Still like we're just saying static, but it's fine, don't worry about it. Don't spend time on it.
It says it should be dead. Okay.
Are you hearing it?
Yeah. Hopefully it's just slow.
Whatever.
Sorry, yeah. That's okay, right.
You sure it's not the computer?
Now,
Maybe.
the zone of proximal development, I think it's quite overlapping with the flow theory that we talked about already. So the idea here is that there are lots of things we can do without help, and there are even more things that we cannot do. In between there is this zone of proximal development where we can manage, we can learn to master with guidance, with help, either from a lecturer, from a teacher, or from one of our fellow students. And outside here, in the red, we can't get much learning. So what we like to do is to help learning by getting people into, get the students into the zone where with help they can do it. Without help, it's too hard. It will be scary. As we talked about with the self-determination theory and the flow theory. Talked about if your competence is too low, it's just scary. If the competence is high, you can do more without aid, and then you don't need the aiding. So is it hard to see?
Nice one.
Yeah, we couldn't find a way to lower the blinds. And a related theory here is the theory of scaffolding. So with scaffolding, what we think is that when you are entering that zone, you need quite a lot of help in the beginning. But gradually, you could take some of the scaffolding away, and then the students will be able to manage and to learn by themselves. And this is what games are doing quite naturally, by having levels. So you start by a low level, so the scaffolding is to don't expose you to the more advanced tasks, and then gradually, as you get more and more skill, then more and more of the scaffolding is taken away. You're going to be more on your own. Another theory is related to students' achievement goals. So if I asked each one of you, are you here because you would like to become a master? You would like to be one that's very skilled and has mastery of developing games, developing good systems? Or are you here because you would like to be among the top 10 students, or maybe the best student in your class, or get A on this course? And some students are motivated, some people are motivated by the more extrinsic goals, like status, like being recognized as a good performer. Some are more driven by the fact that they feel mastery. When this theory came in place, there was kind of this, okay, you have either this or that. Either you are performance-oriented or you have a master-oriented goal. But it shows that, no, it's not that simple. Sometimes what you like to do is not appear as one that can perform. You don't want to fail. You don't want to fail the course. I mean, you may start by saying, okay, I would like to have an A, and later in the course you realize that that's too far, so at least I don't want to fail. Or in the mastery case, rather than saying, okay, I want to be a master, no, at least I don't want to show that I can't master this subject. So it becomes kind of a negative. I avoid demonstrating weaknesses rather than trying to become good. And from a learning perspective, this avoidance is difficult, and it stops you from learning, because to learn you need some time to fail. You need some time to approach things that you aren't good at, with the risk of failing. But if you want to become a master, you're going to work on it and improve more and more. And one bad thing is that research shows that quite a lot of students start here having mastery objectives. I would like to be good at programming. I would like to be good at designing serious games. But through the course of the program, through the course of the semester, they fall over here and say, oh, at least I don't want to fail this course. So through games, through whatever we do in the class, what's important is trying to have students, even if they are performance-oriented or mastery-oriented, try to make sure that they still keep on believing that they can become masters or good performers, and not coming that, oh, at least I don't want to fail, I can't fail. Is that question?
If we are looking at a general level, how do we differentiate between performance and mastery?
Performance is typically, you are in a competition, you compare yourself to others. I would like to be among the top 10 in my class. I would like to have an A. So you're looking at the quality of the performance. In the mastery, you are driven by the intrinsic joy of feeling mastery. Of course, there's overlap, because if take sports, athletes. So it's well known from mental research or mental experiments with on how to do with athletes, that if they have a performance goal, say, I would like to be the Olympic medalist, or I would like to be among the 3 best. If they have that focus, very often they fail. If they have the focus of, I'm going to run as good as I can, I'm going to ski at my very best, then if they ski at their very best, maybe they're going to be the Olympic medalist. If they focus on the performance, on the outcome, very often you are getting too anxious, you're getting too stressed, and you don't do your best. You focus on something else than doing the job. Did that explain the difference? Yeah. So it's the one thing though is that having a mastery focus does not necessarily mean that in the end you perform better. I mean, not all having a mastery focus will become the Olympic medalist. Only very few can become. Comment.
Yeah, there's a question from Discord. I just throw it in from Ori Akin, and he's asking: are there any good solutions or theories on assessing ZPD for new users? I'll be off right now. Sorry. The ZPD for new users, my experience, a lot of serious games have a tendency of starting at a level too low to start with. Come back to ZPD because it kind of relates. But no.
We can come back to it when we talk about balancing. We're going to talk about balancing after the break. And we could talk about balancing the game versus the instructional design issue. So we can come back to that. Remind me if I don't mention it myself.
Yeah. I'll make it myself.
So I mean, there are instruments, or there are tests, standardized tests for measuring this. And I could have distributed and see where you are at there. And it's not like these things are absolute or constant. So in different courses, students may have a performance or a mastery goal. In some courses, I know I have to take it. As long as I don't fail, I'm happy. Or as long as I can get C or better so I can be accepted to the PhD program, I'm happy. But in other courses, these are the courses where I really want to do well. This is because I like this course, and this is where I would like to become an expert and perform very well, or master very well. You heard about Bloom's taxonomy? Oh, there's a lot of interesting new stuff. So Bloom's taxonomy. This is something that Christopher and I and all lecturers need to worry about, because when we write the expecting learning outcomes in a course, we have to think about the Bloom's taxonomy. It's been chosen as a way of thinking. What are your learning goals or goals for the course? So the lowest level is just to remember, and you will like to recall facts and basic concepts. And quite a number of the drill and skill games fall in this category. And the Kahoot we just had is in this category. Can you remember what we talked about last week? Did you understand it? Well, we didn't ask about that. We just asked you, can you remember the definition? Can you remember anything from it? So that's the lowest level in competencies. Next is to understand, so you can explain it. You don't only remember what MDA stands for, but you can explain it to somebody else. And you can classify, you can discuss it, you can identify, you can select one from others. Next level is that you can actually apply it. So in programming, if you talk about design patterns, you know what they are, and you can explain them. Now you can also apply them, because you know how to apply the pattern. It's not just about being able to rephrase and explain it, but also to apply it. Then it's about analyzing. How do ideas relate? How can we organize them? How can we compare them? How can we experiment? Evaluate, meaning now we need to be able to judge, and we can critique and weigh. And on the top, and this has changed over the years, because this used to be the top. But now what is on the top, what is considered the hardest and the most advanced, is to be able to create, not to apply. So in our case, I mean, if you can apply programming concepts, it means that you can program. Create means that you create a program for a very new setting. So you can combine ideas, innovative ideas, and you can create something that is new and different. That's now considered to be on the top of that pyramid. So, for a serious game, or for us when we teach, we have to think about, where do we want the students to get? What is the aim? Are we aiming at remembering, understanding, or aiming at they should be able to use this knowledge to create something all new? And in the course or in the game, it may be that you get to a certain level in some competencies, or the other competencies may not bring you all the way to the top. So you will need to balance, or at least think about what your objective is in the game. Does this make sense? So if you look at the course description, at the master's level, you will hopefully find more judge, select, critique, experiment, relate, and less define, list, state, explain. Because this is where, the zone of proximal development means that when you start at the bachelor level, then typically you have a lot of things here to get in place, and gradually you're going to move up. And then at the bachelor thesis level, you get kind of up in this region, and then hopefully in some areas you will be great. But we think that to create really new applications for new challenging domains, you need to get all the way to the top here. So that's the Bloom's taxonomy. It's a kind of pyramid. And as with all these theories and models, it can be discussed and argued that it's not that simple. And you will see a mix within the course. But thinking about it, again, if you think of this as a heuristic device to stimulate thinking, then it's helpful when we design, even for the discussion about the zone of proximal development. You need to try to figure out where can we start. If you have say games for health, how high up can you start? Do you need them to just start repeating certain motions, getting into some basic before you can challenge them at a higher cognitive level? This is kind of a cognitive level type of taxonomy. There is another taxonomy that might also be interesting to know about. It's called SOLO, the structure of observed learning outcomes. So the idea here is that you have different levels of structure in your understanding. So in the beginning, when you came here, you didn't know much about serious games at all. And then Christopher started to talk about what is serious game and trying to explain through some examples. So now you can define what a serious game is, identify, and you can show some simple characteristics of a serious game. But as you move on, then you have more examples. You can see games for different areas, and you can define still, but now it goes listed, and you can combine various elements, various competencies. And even higher, you are now even able to compare them, and contrast, and classify, and relate the pieces of knowledge. So think of this as individual pieces of knowledge. Let's say serious games. So rather than just being able to show different games, different theories, now you're able to relate the various theories, the various games. You can see the similarities between games for health and games for education, and you can see how these relate. And at the very top here, it's called Extended Abstract, which is kind of a strange name, and it doesn't say much, but it's about abstraction. So now you're able to create a more abstract understanding. This is something we have talked about when it comes to writing reports. For us, as lecturers, it's kind of frustrating that students aren't good in writing reports because you have written so many reports. But the first time you write a report, you have one experience from one type of report. So let's say you have a report in math or physics experiments. And then you write reports in more types of courses. You write maybe one in some biology studies. You write one in a development project. And now, relational, then you're starting to say how elements from various types of reports relate. When you get to the highest level, I can ask you to write a report in something you've never seen before, and you understand, okay, who is the reader, what do they want to know, what is important here, and you would be able to put together a table of content for a good report. Because you see the abstract, you can see the general purpose. You follow me? And similarly, if you go to that question about sort of proximal development. So if you start up here and students are down here, there's no way they can bridge that gap. But at the same time, if the students are already here and you start by giving these individual examples, it will be boring and it won't be a learning experience. So you kind of need to get into that zone quickly. Constructive alignment. This is very important. And we talked about alignment a little bit. Christopher talked about alignment already. And it shouldn't be a big surprise, but it kind of, when it came as a theory, it has had significant changes to universities and education institutions. So what Biggs and Pine said, okay, you have the course learning outcome. So this is what you plan the students to learn. This is the aim. In serious games, if you look up the expected learning outcome, you're going to see that we have some objectives. We'd like you to learn some or know something. We'd like you to show some skills, and we'd like you to have some general competencies. Now, what you do in a course, or if you have a serious game, this is the game objective of the game. What you do in the game, the activities should be aligned. So if you would like to learn, let's say programming, of course you need to program. If you were to learn to be good at evaluating, of course, learning activities should be to evaluate. So there needs to be alignment. And most importantly, it needs to be well aligned in how you assess. So typically, it's about programming. You program a lot, and then in the exam you're asked questions about theory. But you have to be measured against programming, and you ask theory. The same with serious games. So you use game to play and to learn something, and in the assessment or in the final exam, you might be asked theory questions. It has nothing to do with all your learning activities. So in any serious game, think of it this way: you should have the learning outcome. What do you want the players to benefit, to learn, to achieve, to master? And then what activities do you need? How can we make sure that they are going to learn and to master this? And then how do we measure? And in games, there's typically in-game measures. So you try to, by looking at the performance in the game, to assess whether the learning outcomes have been reached. But now the problem is that if some of these objectives are not so easily measurable in game performance, then you may need to think something in addition to the very obvious game-based metric.
Is this model explicit about the type of assessment task? Like, is there further information into different forms, like forms of something considered, or is it just abstract?
So the question was whether this relates to the type of assessment.
Yeah, exactly. But because the thing is here to ensure the congruence between learning outcomes, learning activities, and that the assessments are a means to an end, right? So
Yes, that means to an end. And they could be, this is in general, both summative, meaning what results in a grade, and formative, meaning what would help you during your studies, or whoever is doing the game, to become better. What is the feedback that the game provides in the games of a serious game? What is the feedback the game gives? And the feedback should be relevant to achieve the learning outcome. And in the end, when you are to get some award or some what level you are at, that way your level is measured, should be aligned with the objective. And of course, the learning activities should help you be able to get good results from the assessment. So, a number of theories about the content and the structure of a course. So, there are different theories about how students learn, how we all learn. And one of them is a constructive type of approach. It's called the Kolb's learning cycle. And what it says that many times we learn from concrete experiences. So we would like to do something, or we have an experience. So you're working on the math, you work on your programming, and you encounter a problem, and you have an experience. And games would obviously be able to give you a lot of experiences. Now, to learn from the experience, you need to reflect. You need to observe and reflect. The first is observing, so you will review and reflect on the experience. So why did this happen? So I can see it happen, and why did this happen? Why did I react the way I did? And after you reflect on it, you abstract. You create an abstract understanding, a higher level. So if you remember solo, final and extended abstract, you take all the individual experiences and you try to create an extended abstract understanding of it. So here, you try to conclude, you try to learn, say, okay, now I can see this was yet another report, and I can see again, I had to introduce, I had to to go through the procedure. So you kind of have a better abstract understanding of what writing a report is, which means that you can then formulate a hypothesis. Okay, if my understanding is correct, then I should be experiencing this. So you try to say, okay, based on my understanding, this should happen, and then you can try it. So a simulation is like this. So you have a simulation, you see something, and you say, why does happen? And you reflect and think, oh, I think this is the cause. And then you say, okay, if that is the cause, then this is the larger picture. Then I should be able to, if I tweak on these parameters, if I do this, this is what I should see. And then you can go back and have a new concrete experience. I don't know if this is the way you learn, this is the way but in our field, in computer science, this is so easy. I mean, if you work on programming concepts, if you work on while loops, if you work on database normalization, it's so easy to test. It's so easy to set up, to program something or to set up a test, and then see what happens, and then see, oh, why did this happen? And then you can run through this again and test this to understand it correct. Question?
Yeah, it feels like very similar to trial and error, when not when the error of the trial part is like the bottom part of the circle falls a bit short on that, but I think it's quite similar, isn't it?
You could say it's kind of a trial and error, but the difference is that these two, the reflective observation and the abstract conceptualization, is a very systematic approach. Because sometimes you could just try, and you don't reflect so much. You just try. And what did I hear one of my colleagues say? The difference between a human being and a monkey is basically, it's to separate the two, is basically a human being might think that the same action will have different results. So if you do the same thing over and over again, the human being will think that next time maybe it's going to be different. But the monkey would say, if you try 2 times and can do it, you're going to forget about the idea. But we as human beings, we think that, okay, maybe it can be different anyway. So it's about not just trial and error, it's also about trying to understand why. So this reflective observation and the abstract conceptualization will be important, because what you're trying to do is trying to create a higher level understanding of why it happened, and you're testing your idea, not just randomly trying, but systematically to try to verify if your understanding is correct. So it's much more targeted than trial and error can be. But of course, it could be trial and error, it can be in the same kind of setting. So you say, I don't know, but just let me try. And then you find what you think would be patterns between successful outcome and unsuccessful outcome. And then you try to say, okay, why is that? Maybe this could be the reason. And then you systematically set up a different trial with different parameters where you say, okay, I should expect this to happen. And then you will see if that is matching your idea or your expectations.
I think the important thing is to highlight that it's really more explicit. There's an abstraction component in there. If you think about debugging in computer science, right, your program doesn't quite work, and you fudge around with the parameters just to see it work. I think that would be a shortcut from some observation into active experimentation.
And you may not have much learned. So the thing is that this abstract conceptualization, your mental model, that's being used in other literature, you find the term mental model. Your understanding, your mental model, that's what matters, because that is what you learn. You upgrade or you modify your mental model, you make it more advanced. And the mental model, you should be able to predict certain results, and you try it. And if it fails, you say, oh, my mental model isn't correct. I need to upgrade it. Why could it be? And you try to upgrade, and then you go back again. So it's more about the learning process. The other were more about the stages of competence. This is more about the process. And again, I think games and computer in general. And so for computer students, it's so great. You have all these tools available. So rather than have things explained to you, say, what do I think will happen? And you try it. And you say, didn't happen, why could that be? And you try to figure and analyze why. Say, okay, now I can design this new experiment. And you can try and you say, oh, go, I found it, what it was. Okay, that's should be enough for theories for a day, I think. Yeah?
That's very short.
Yeah, right. So since we played with Kahoot already, now we're not going to do a game, but we're going to do a student response system approach anyway. So if you go to menti.com, so now it's short answers. You just write in your reflection on what I talked about so far. What do you find to be the most surprising and or useful for you and for what you what was most unique to what you already knew? To be this way, among what you said, and because this is a long short answer, I give you more time. Like 20 seconds, you get much more now. So just think about it. What was most surprising? What is most or useful? Or maybe both. That's right.
Professor, I have a presentation about the gains in education. So how different should it be now? Like you gave us basically should we give some specific examples?
Well, let's talk about that because I have after a break I have another section where I'm going to go through some of the balances. So in serious games, we talked about some balances. I'm going to reflect a little bit more on balancing, and then we can talk about after that.
That's the scientific. I think we do it because we were aware that might happen. I feel that because of come up with things. Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah. Back into fire screen for the same number of people. Right. It's just a small complete theory, though, right? Yeah. We could work on. But of course, I can think about the music earlier. That's impossible to do anything with it. Then you have it and to some extent consideration. Yeah.
Just to say that, so
Question from Christopher here. How much time do they usually give for these type of, because I'm using this in my regular lecture as well, or when I give presentations, I sometimes use this to have interaction with the audience and to have the reflection on it. And usually what I do is I wait until half of the audience has answered, and then I go on, because I can't expect 100%. But in this case, since we are here and we're talking about these tools and techniques, I was expecting not 60, I think we should be there. So that's why I gave you a bit more time, but usually I would be happy when half of the audience has answered, because then they have enough to reflect on. It's typically covered most of the interesting topics. At the same time, those who are still in the process of writing can still write in as we start to discuss. So that's why I've chosen that one. I have no no theory from psychology or any other field supporting me there, just that I feel it's okay. But okay, I should have some empirical basis for that. So let's go through some of the responses. Let's see, show result. Oops. Updated Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy. Nothing particularly surprising. Can Bloom's taxonomy draw parallels from the bachelor, master, and PhD course? Absolutely. So that's why it's used in Norway. So in Norway, we have to adhere to the European qualification framework, and the European qualification framework is using the taxonomy to say this is typically what you expect at the bachelor level, at the master level, at the PhD level. That's absolutely one of the purposes of it. People have different motivations, yes, and that could be useful to keep in mind when designing serious games. I hope so. Learning patterns and cycles are very recognizable for many daily activities where learning is involved. I hope so too, and I hope this is something that you can bring in there as well. And that's besides the self-determination theory, we also have this theory of self-directed learning. I haven't talked about that. The self-directed learning can also be something for you to look into, because one of the things with games is that they give the user a level of control. And it's better if it's self-directed rather than being instructed to do something. You do it because it's self-directed. Cyclic nature versus the hierarchical nature of proposed projects. Okay, so I hope that is the learning. The only cycle I think will be the Kolb's cycle, and see how you have iterations. You build on the existing and you keep up. Systematic knowledge. Okay, good. Kolb's learning cycle and how what learned before can be translated in new situations and the structure of Bloom's taxonomy. Yes, and I think that one of the reasons why I did the Mentimeter is that to learn something, we know that you need to be able to relate to something you already know. So when I ask for something surprising, it means that you need to go back and think about what you already know and how can I link some of these things to what I know. Because if it's to say whether or not it's surprising, you need to go through your existing level of knowledge. So absolutely, and that is in game and in education, designing this, thinking about, and we have the question about progress, how fast you can go. The question from the Discord. How fast, how can you avoid going too slowly into removing the scaffolding? That is a problem we have. Now, each one of you have different speed. And for some of you, this is, as I said, I know this before, so this is just the nuances of what I already know. And for some of you, this is all new, you need much more time. And how can we adapt to that difference in needs and difference in expectations? And that's where one of the thinking is that with a game, each player can play it at their speed. That's one of the advantages. It's easier to adapt to the individual. So interesting to how they kind of correlate with scientific methodology, like how Bloom's theory is similar to scientific methodology with analyze, evaluate, and create level. Yes, that's absolutely valid point. Different approaches at the same problem. Yeah, that is the, I mean,
when you get to come at the massive level, then unfortunately you have to deal with, there are so many different approaches, and there are qualities, and if you think about solo, the individual methodologies, the first is to learn one, and then you learn a number of them, and then you are able to combine them, and eventually you're going to see, okay, what characterizes a good methodology in general, and what is my problem, and what how can you approach that? Student achievement goals most useful, absolutely, and that is it's interesting that in sports, the mastery versus performance goal is very what to say? It's a lot of discussion at least in Norway about that, because to keep kids in sports for longer, you will want to keep them into the mastery goals because they can always be better. I started climbing after I was 40, and I'm still getting better than I've ever been, even if I start late, because I have a mastery goal. If I wanted to be Norwegian champion, I would have dropped for a long time ago. I just can't be that. So if I have that kind of performance goal, being the best in Norway, I can forget about it. But being better than what I was last year, I can always be that. Luke's taxonomy seems like an accurate representation of different levels of understanding, mastery of any concept. Yeah, as I said, it's one theory, and it's helpful. It helps to understand some aspects, and there are some aspects it doesn't cover. Cobb's learning cycle, going back and forth between abstract and concrete, feeds understanding to each other. Absolutely, and that's why I'm hoping that you and the games you develop will encourage the students to get into that exploration mode. I'm going to come back to that next after the break. Exploration mode, self-driven, trying to say, okay, this is what I understand, and if this is correct, then I should see this happen if I do this. And then you go on experiment, and you find some evidence, or you find it didn't work that way. Okay, it's something I misunderstood, and then you go back again. Nothing surprising, too theoretical. I think maybe showing some examples are better to understand and apply the theories in practice. Absolutely. Nothing surprising. Okay, then I think you know what from the field, maybe?
I think that's the hope here, right? So what I think what Runa does and what I did last year to throw theory set, right? It's your task to become masters or develop mastery to evaluate those and to attach it to specific problems. So in your case, I would go around finding examples of games for education and seeing how far those models do or do not fit. They will not always quite fit what you're doing, right? So that's why we kind of leave it a bit lean there. But if you want a complete example in terms of the solo model, I mean, from the abstraction point of view, for the programmers amongst you, different programming paradigms, right? You learn about OO, you learn perhaps about function programming, then someone throws something further to you like logic programming and so on. And you suddenly see, okay, we don't no longer look at, okay, what is object orientation and function programming do, but rather what does a paradigm do, right? So, and this is the kind of thinking I want to entrench there. But yes, we're lean on examples, but that's part of the
Design. That was our choice.
That's where you fit in. You bring the
because if we did already, then I would have taken some of the good examples you would like to bring in the lecture next time. So we makes it easy for you to bring in good examples. That's not an excuse. I mean, it sounds like an excuse because the hard part, and what I agree with here in that statement is that the hard part is not to understand the theory. The hard part is not to find the practical application. The hard part is to combine the two. But Christopher and I would very much rather comment on your attempts to link these two than for us to give kind of ready explanations of it. I'm sorry, but that's how we were thinking of it. More examples? Yes, I agree in general, but as you said, this is what we like you to be able to. We don't want to steal good examples from you. And I will, though, come back and talk about your Kahoot experience, which is practical and in the light of what we talked about. Cobb's learning cycle can be mapped to various design cycles. Yes, constructive alignment. Good reminder, yeah. And not all, I mean, we are human beings, so we are not always good at doing this in practice in all cases. So it's good to be reminded about that. Bloom's taxonomy, I think the top layers apply and above is quite hard to approach for students who don't have working experience. The others are quite similar to my learning. Yes, that is absolutely a point, but that working experience, ideally, you should get some of that during your studies. You should be able to, I mean, if as a programmer, if the objective is that you are to become good at creating new programs, obviously you could experience that out in industry, but we would like to give you projects and experiences within the studies that would allow you to give that practical experience as well.
But it also pointed one of the challenges of Bloom's taxonomy more generally. First of all, it's not as linear, right? Similar to Maslow's hierarchy, you're not just at one level. So, for example, you may be in one way higher level with respect to methodological or project management skills, but a way lower level with respect to programming skills. So even within a course, there's this dissonance, which is argued for this taxonomy. Second of all, it doesn't necessarily relate to practical experience. It can also relate to research, right? So having only a conventional academic career and going into a PhD and so on, you can of course reach very much the creation goal. So it does not relate to producing artifacts or software or anything. It's generic in any respect, right? If you want to develop, or if you want to follow Rune's footsteps and say you want to develop educational theory, for example, right, within or outside computer science, you can of course get to the stage to create theory, right? Doesn't mean that you're a good programmer at all. I mean, it's totally independent of the subject at hand, right? So, but of course it applies to programming as well. It's just to clarify, it doesn't mean as if you reach a grade stage, means you have experience out in the industry and you'll be able to do it. It's generally.
But from a meta level, from a higher level, I think the two most important things that you will learn in school, any level, is one, learn how you can learn new stuff, because you always need to learn new stuff. And sometimes that is what you learn in industry or in a company. And secondly, to learn a systematic way to solve a problem. And hopefully that's what they give you. So when you get out there in industry, you have a systematic way. So now we are giving you some theories, and we talked about some approaches, and hopefully that would aggregate up to you know, okay, divide and conquer, okay, think in cycles, start from the bottom, build it up, more complex from the simple to the complex. I mean, lots of things we talked about here are things we hope that during your studies you will grasp that approach, so you don't need us to tell us, or you don't need us to get to the highest level. You do it yourself, but we provided the basic understanding and the basic way of working and thinking that will enable you to get all the way to the top. Okay, let's have a break there. So how many minutes?
I don't know, 4 or 9? Oh no, 3 or 8. What do you want? 3 or 8?
8 minutes.
8 minutes, okay, until 1:20 then.
Right, thanks.
Spend 2 minutes or a few minutes on the respective assignments, because next week the first group will be filled. So just remind them that they need to log in their conferences and so on. And that's the list will be fine. Otherwise,
Yeah, 10 points.
You have the wiki open. You have the wiki.
I have so many tabs open, I don't know where it is.
So just to ensure that it's training.
I don't know if
You have it on the screen. I stop it and restart. Yeah. You just push the stop button basically and start again. Because else you have 8 minutes of chatter.
I'm sorry. So just to stop stream.